The story begins in a large, dimly lit room within the council ship of the Galactic Coalition, a vast space station that serves as the political heart of the galaxy. The galaxy's most powerful and ancient species gather around a long metallic table, each race seated in an order that reflects their power and status across the stars. But one species remains on the edge of the room, uninvited and unnoticed: humanity. A newly discovered race whose presence in space was still considered insignificant. They had not yet proven themselves in battle or diplomacy. Their ships were rudimentary compared to the advanced technology wielded by the other species. Their fleet was small, their resources stretched thin, and their military experience minimal. But despite this, humanity had earned the attention of the Galactic Coalition by their sheer tenacity and their will to survive. Admiral Jonathan Kane sat among the most esteemed leaders of the galaxy, a room filled with legendary warriors and wise diplomats. Yet despite his position at the table, he knew he was the least respected. His people had been included as an afterthought. He was not yet seen as a peer, but as a curiosity, a species that might someday be worth something, but not today, not now. The council began their deliberations discussing matters of galactic warfare and defense strategies. The most dominant species spoke with authority, their words filled with certainty and expectation. But when it was time to address humanity's role in the coming conflict, the room grew quiet, a silence that spoke volumes. The humans were last to be considered. Their fleet was seen as expendable, a mere footnote in the grand scheme of things. Admiral Kane kept his composure. He had learned the art of patience and observation during his years of service. He listened intently as the representatives of other species argued about which fleet would take the lead in various regions of the galaxy. Their voices filled the air like the buzz of insects, a cacophony of opinions and demands. When the moment arrived for humanity to be addressed, the council did not even look at Kane. They simply threw a mission his way, a small scouting operation on the outer rim of the galaxy. It was far from the glory of the other assignments, but it was all that humanity was granted for now. Kane accepted without hesitation, but deep down he knew the stakes were far higher than anyone else understood. His mission was clear: monitor the movements of an unknown alien faction that had been causing disturbances along the edges of known space. He and his crew were to avoid confrontation, at all costs retreat if necessary, and report back with any intelligence they could gather. It was an insignificant task on the surface, a simple scouting mission, one that would require little more than observation. But Kane knew something the others did not. He had spent years studying enemy tactics and listening to the whispers of the stars. There was more to this mission than it seemed, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the galaxy's greatest threat might already be upon them. He could not afford to be cautious, not now, not when humanity's future was at stake. His decision was made before the council meeting ended. He would take the mission, but he would not follow orders blindly. He would act when the time was right. And if that meant disobeying his superiors, then so be it. He was not going to let humanity's fate be decided by others' indifference. And so, with a single word from his lips, Kane sealed his fleet's fate and humanity's future. Prepare to launch. The fleet destroyer drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, its engines barely making a sound as it moved through the dark void of the outer rim. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the ship watching the stars as they passed by the view screen. His thoughts weighed heavy on his mind. The crew had been restless ever since the council meeting. Their mission felt insignificant, and their place in the galaxy uncertain. Kane could feel the tension growing in his officers, and the quiet unease that lingered in the air. It was the same feeling he had seen in his fellow humans during difficult times, when doubt crept into the heart and made even the strongest question their worth. As the fleet destroyer approached the coordinates they had been given, Kane's gut told him something was wrong. Something didn't sit right. He had studied the data they had received from the Galactic Coalition, but there was a nagging feeling deep within him that the intelligence was incomplete. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more lurking out there in the shadows. His first officer, Lieutenant Sarah Connor, approached him with a report, her face serious as she handed him the datapad. "Admiral, we've detected strange readings just beyond the asteroid field at the edge of the system. It's not on any of our charts," she said, her voice low. Kane took the pad from her, without a word, scanning the information quickly. He studied the data for a moment before looking back at her. "Prepare the fleet for a detour," he ordered, his voice firm and steady. "But sir, the mission was clear. We're supposed to observe, not engage," Connor protested. Kane's eyes narrowed as he turned toward her, his mind already working through the possibilities. "I know what the mission was, but this isn't just about observation. We can't afford to ignore this. Something is out there, and if we wait too long, we could be walking into a trap." His decision was made, and though it was a gamble, he knew it was the only option he had. He trusted his instincts and his crew more than any intel from the Coalition. They would move quickly and carefully through the asteroid field, navigating the narrow corridors of rock and debris. As the fleet destroyer moved deeper into the field, Kane's senses heightened. Every click of the ship's systems, the hum of the engines, the chatter over the comms, it all seemed to amplify in the silence of space. He was ready for anything, even if he wasn't sure exactly what he was preparing for. Then it came without warning, a sudden burst of energy that lit up the darkness ahead of them. The sensors screamed a warning as a massive alien ship appeared from behind a hidden asteroid, its sleek black hull barely visible in the vastness of space. Kane's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. He was a soldier, a leader, and he knew what had to be done. He turned to Connor. "Sound the alarm, prepare for battle," he ordered. The crew sprang into action as the massive enemy ship powered up its weapons, targeting the fleet destroyer with deadly precision. Kane's mind raced as he quickly assessed the situation. The odds were against them. The enemy ship was far larger and better equipped, but the fleet destroyer had something the enemy didn't expect. "We're not running," Kane said quietly to himself as he gripped the command chair. "We're fighting." The battle began with the fleet destroyer dodging and weaving through the asteroid field, using the rocks as cover. As they engaged the enemy, Kane's mind moved a mile a minute. As he devised strategies on the fly, every second counted, and he would make sure that humanity's first strike would be one they would never forget. The odds were long, but Kane knew one thing for sure: if the humans were going to survive, they would have to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The battle raged on as the fleet destroyer maneuvered through the asteroid field, its weapons firing with deadly precision. Kane's pulse raced as he watched the enemy ship through the command viewport. The massive alien vessel loomed like a dark shadow, its weapons tearing into the space around them. The enemy was ruthless. They targeted the fleet destroyer's engines, first knowing that if they crippled the ship it would be easy pickings. But Kane was ready for this. He had trained his crew to think on their feet and use their surroundings to their advantage. As the enemy ship locked onto their position, Kane barked orders to his officers. "Move us through the asteroid belt. Get us behind that large cluster of rocks. Full speed ahead," he commanded, his eyes never leaving the viewport. The crew worked seamlessly together, following Kane's orders without hesitation. The ship sped toward a cluster of asteroids, weaving in and out of the debris with expert precision. The alien ship fired again, but the shots missed as the fleet destroyer disappeared behind a large asteroid. "Direct hit to the shields," Connor reported, her voice tense. "Get them back up now," Kane snapped. "We need those shields if we're going to survive this." The tension was palpable as the crew scrambled to maintain the ship's systems. Each second felt like an eternity as Kane watched the enemy ship regroup and attempt to follow them into the asteroid field. "Admiral, they're adjusting their course," Connor said. "They're not going to let us escape." Kane's mind raced as he considered their options. They were trapped in a narrow corridor surrounded by asteroids, and the enemy was closing in fast. He couldn't outrun them, and they didn't have the firepower to defeat such a formidable ship head-on. But there was one thing the enemy didn't know about humanity. "We're going to surprise them," Kane muttered to himself as an idea formed in his mind. He turned to Connor. "Set a course toward the asteroid field's edge. We're going to lure them into a trap." "But Sir," Connor started to protest. "No arguments," Kane cut her off. "We need to do this fast if we're going to make it out of here alive." The plan was risky, but Kane was convinced it was their only shot. They would bait the enemy ship into following them toward the asteroid field's edge, where a narrow opening would lead them into a larger area of space, a space where they could use the full might of the fleet destroyer's weapons. As the human ship moved toward the edge of the field, the enemy followed them without hesitation, its weapons powered up, and fired once more. Kane could feel the tension build in his chest as they approached the opening. Now he ordered full power to the engines, turn hard to port. The fleet destroyer veered sharply as it entered the opening, and the enemy ship followed too closely without realizing the trap that had been set for it. Just as the enemy ship entered the larger area, Kane gave the order. "Fire everything we've got." The fleet destroyer unleashed a barrage of plasma shots and missiles at the alien vessel, catching it off guard. The first few shots struck the enemy's shields, weakening them enough for a follow-up strike to hit the hull. The enemy ship faltered, its weapons firing erratically as it tried to retaliate, but it was too late. The human ship's weapons continued to pummel the alien vessel until it finally exploded in a burst of light. Kane let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding as the pieces of the enemy ship drifted into space. The crew erupted in cheers, but Kane remained calm, his mind already moving forward. "We've won this battle," he said quietly, "but the war is just beginning." The victory was hard won, but it didn't feel like one. Not to Kane. The battle had been intense, and the crew had fought with everything they had, but the price of victory was high, and the aftermath was heavy. He stood at the bridge watching the debris of the destroyed enemy ship drift in space. The silence was almost deafening. The crew was still celebrating their hard-earned triumph, but Kane couldn't bring himself to join in the cheers. He knew this was only the beginning, and that far greater challenges were ahead. He could feel it in his bones, the uneasy feeling that had settled over him since the moment they entered the asteroid field was still there, gnawing at the back of his mind. Lieutenant Connor approached him, her face more serious than usual. "Admiral, we've received a message from the Galactic Coalition," she said, handing him another datapad. Kane took it without a word and began reading. The message was from the Council, and it was not good. It seemed that their victory had caught the attention of far more than just the Xor. The species they had just defeated, a far more dangerous threat, was emerging, one that had been dormant for centuries. The Agarak had awakened. The Agarak were a race of ancient beings whose technology was far more advanced than anything the Coalition had ever encountered. They were cold, calculating, and ruthless, known for their ability to manipulate entire star systems with ease. The galaxy had once thought them extinct, or at least dormant for 1,000 years, but now they were returning, and the human fleet had become their first target. Kane felt a chill run down his spine as he read the words on the datapad. The Agarak had decided to make an example of humanity, and their first act of aggression was already underway. "They're attacking Earth," Kane muttered to himself. Connor's face paled at the news, but she stood strong, her voice steady as she asked, "Do we go back? Do we defend Earth?" Kane looked out at the vastness of space, his mind racing with the enormity of the situation. Earth was home. It was where his people lived and fought. But it was also a target now. The Agarak would not stop until they had wiped humanity out. "We're not going back yet," Kane said finally, his voice firm. "We need to find out more about the Agarak and what they want. If we can't stop them at their source, we won't be able to protect Earth or any of our colonies." Connor nodded in agreement, though she knew the risks were higher than ever. "Understood, sir," she said. Kane turned to the rest of the bridge crew, his eyes scanning the faces of his officers. They were tired, bruised from the battle, but still standing strong. He could see the resolve in their eyes, and knew they wouldn't back down now. They had already faced the impossible and won. "We're going to need to be ready for anything," Kane said, his voice strong and filled with determination. "We have a chance to stop the Agarak before they can strike Earth, but we have to move fast and hit them where it hurts." The crew nodded as one, and the atmosphere on the bridge shifted. Kane knew what they were up against, but he also knew they had something the Agarak didn't expect. They had each other and the will to fight until the very end. "Let's get to work," Kane said as he sat back down in his command chair. the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders, but his resolve unwavering. The fleet destroyer moved silently through the blackness of space, the crew working tirelessly to prepare for the next phase of their mission. They had all felt the weight of the news that had come from the Galactic Coalition. The Agarak were not just another enemy, they were an ancient force of destruction, and now they had set their sights on humanity. Earth was their first target, but it wouldn't be the last if they succeeded. Kane stood at the bridge, his eyes fixed on the star map in front of him. The route was clear. They had to head directly into Agarak territory and gather intelligence before they could even think about stopping their invasion. But every move they made was a risk. The Agarak were an unknown quantity, their technology and tactics unlike anything humanity had faced before. Lieutenant Connor approached him, her voice calm but filled with concern. "Admiral, we've detected an Agarak fleet moving toward Earth. They'll be there in less than 2 days." She reported, her eyes scanning the screens for further data. Kane took a deep breath, knowing they had no time to waste. "Prepare the ship for a jump to their territory," he said, turning to face her. "We need to know everything we can about their fleet before we make any decisions." Connor nodded as she relayed the orders to the crew. The ship's engines roared to life as they began the long journey into Agarak space. The tension on the bridge was palpable. No one knew exactly what they were heading into, but everyone knew the stakes. As the fleet destroyer moved closer to enemy territory, Kane's mind raced. He had been in countless battles and faced enemies far more powerful than himself, but the Agarak were different. They were ancient, they were patient, and they had been waiting for the right moment to strike. "What's our status?" Kane asked, breaking the silence that had fallen over the bridge. "We're approaching the outer edge of Agarak space now," Connor replied. "Our scans are picking up multiple ships in the distance, but nothing close enough to engage yet." "Good," Kane said, his voice steady, but his mind alert. "Keep our sensors sharp. I don't want to miss anything." The minutes ticked by slowly as they moved deeper into Agarak territory. The stars around them seemed to grow darker as they crossed the threshold into the unknown. The tension on the bridge grew with every passing second as they waited for the inevitable contact. And then it came, a sudden blip on the sensors as a massive Agarak ship appeared from the shadows. It was unlike anything they had seen before, its sleek black hull reflecting the starlight like a shadow of death. "Admiral, we've been detected," Connor said, her voice tense. "They're powering up their weapons." Kane's heart raced, but his mind remained clear. "Brace for impact," he ordered. The crew scrambled into position as the Agarak ship closed in, their weapons locking onto the fleet destroyer. But Kane had expected this. He knew the Agarak would find them the moment they entered their territory, and he had planned for it. "Engage evasive maneuvers," Kane commanded as the ship lurched to one side, avoiding the first blast of enemy fire. The fleet destroyer was smaller and more nimble than the Agarak ship, and Kane used that to their advantage. He guided the ship through a series of twists and turns, ducking in and out of asteroid fields to avoid the full force of the enemy's weapons. The Agarak ship fired again, but this time Kane was ready. He ordered the fleet destroyer to return fire, the weapons charging as the ship's cannons unleashed a volley of plasma shots. The blasts hit the Agarak ship with surprising accuracy, but it didn't seem to faze the enemy. "They're using advanced shields," Connor said. "Our shots aren't getting through." Kane clenched his fists as he surveyed the battle. He knew this would be the moment that tested his crew's abilities and his leadership. He couldn't afford to lose here, not when humanity's survival was on the line. "Keep pressing the attack," Kane said through gritted teeth. "We need to find a weakness." The battle intensified as the fleet destroyer danced through space, weaving in and out of asteroid clusters and debris fields. The Agarak ship fired relentlessly, its weapons crackling with power. Each shot shook the human ship and rocked the crew with a force they weren't accustomed to, but they held firm. Kane's eyes darted across the screens, analyzing every movement and calculating every possibility. His mind raced, trying to find the weakness he needed to exploit. He had seen powerful enemies before, but the Agarak were something else entirely. Their technology far superior, and their strategy precise. Their shields were impenetrable, and their weapons unforgiving. Lieutenant Connor's voice broke through his thoughts. "Admiral, their shields are reinforcing as we speak, they're not weakening," she reported, her face tense with frustration. Kane frowned. As he considered their options, they couldn't keep this up forever. The fleet destroyer was outmatched, and they were running low on ammunition. If they didn't find a way to break through soon, they would be overwhelmed. "Bring us closer," he ordered, his voice steady. "We need to get within range of their weak points." Connor hesitated for a moment, but then nodded and relayed the order to the crew. The ship's engines roared as they accelerated toward the Agarak vessel. Getting closer and closer, Kane could feel the pressure building, the danger increasing with every passing moment. As they drew near, Kane's eyes locked onto a specific area of the enemy ship, a cluster of large energy conduits exposed on the side of the vessel. They were vulnerable. If they could hit them precisely, they could disrupt the Agarak shields and create an opening. "Target those conduits," Kane commanded, his voice sharp. "All weapons on that spot now." The crew followed his orders without hesitation. The fleet destroyer's cannons fired in rapid succession, each blast aimed with deadly precision at the enemy's weak point. The shots struck home, the first few hits damaging the energy conduits, but it wasn't enough to bring the shields down entirely. "Shields are still holding," Connor reported, "but they're starting to flicker." Kane felt a spark of hope, but he knew they couldn't waste any time. They had to push harder and faster. "Keep firing," he barked. "We have to finish this before they can regroup." The battle continued to rage as the fleet destroyer's weapons hammered away at the Agarak ship. Their shields flickered and sparked, but they didn't collapse. The Agarak ship's return fire grew more erratic as it struggled to maintain its lock on the smaller human ship. Kane knew they were running out of time. The Agarak wouldn't hesitate to finish them off if they could. Then it happened. The shields of the Agarak ship finally faltered. One last hit broke through, and the shields collapsed entirely. The enemy ship's hull was exposed, and Kane wasted no time. "Fire everything we've got," he shouted. The fleet destroyer's weapons unleashed a final barrage, the force of it shaking the ship as missiles and plasma blasts hit the exposed hull of the Agarak ship. The first few hits breached the outer layers of armor, but it was the final strike that did the damage. A massive explosion erupted from the heart of the enemy vessel as it collapsed in on itself. Kane watched through the viewport as the Agarak ship was torn apart in a blaze of light and fire. Debris scattered across the void of space, and the battle was over. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief, but Kane knew this was only a temporary victory. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. "Get us back on course," Kane ordered, his voice steady once more. "We need to find out where the Agarak are coming from and stop them before they can launch their full assault on Earth." The fleet destroyer began its slow journey forward again, but the mood on the bridge had changed. There was no longer any doubt in their minds. The humans had proven they could stand against the galaxy's most terrifying enemies, and now they were ready to take the fight to the Agarak before it was too late. The fleet destroyer moved cautiously through the vast reaches of Agarak space, its sensors scanning every inch of the dark expanse. As the crew worked tirelessly to stay ahead of the enemy, the battle with the Agarak had been a victory, but it had come at a cost. The ship had taken damage and supplies were running low, but they couldn't afford to rest. Not now, not with Earth still in imminent danger. Kane stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the starlit expanse ahead of him. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him heavier with each passing moment. The Agarak were not just a threat to Earth, they were a threat to all of humanity's future. He had to stop them before it was too late. "Admiral, we've detected a large fleet ahead." Connor's voice interrupted his thoughts. "It's too far for us to engage, but they're headed in the direction of Earth." Kane's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. "Plot a course to intercept," he ordered without hesitation. "Sir," Connor said, hesitating, "that fleet is massive. It's unlike anything we've seen before. It's possible they have reinforcements on the way. We don't have the firepower to take them on head-to-head." Kane didn't flinch. "We don't need to engage them directly. We need to gather intel and find their weak points," he replied. "We've been through this Before we're going to outthink them, not outfight them. Connor nodded, but Kane could see the concern in her eyes. They had been outmatched in the previous battle, and while they had survived it, the odds were not in their favor. The Agarak were relentless, and now they were moving toward Earth at an alarming speed. We have to be ready for anything, Kane added, his voice firm. Prepare the crew for evasive maneuvers, and keep the weapons at full readiness. As the fleet destroyer made its way closer to the enemy fleet, Kane turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Harris. Have we found any weaknesses in their fleet yet? He asked. Harris shook his head, his face grim. Not yet, sir. Their ships are heavily armored, and their weapons are far more advanced than anything we have. They're using some sort of cloaking technology to keep their movements hidden, but we've managed to catch a few blips on the radar. Kane's mind raced. He knew that if they didn't find a way to break through the Agarak's defenses, soon humanity's last line of defense, Earth, would be lost. We need to learn more about their cloaking technology, Kane said. If we can disrupt their ability to hide their fleet, we can catch them off guard and hit them where it hurts. Connor stepped forward with a report. Admiral, we've also detected a smaller ship within their fleet, she said. It's not as well protected as the others, and it seems to be carrying something important. It could be our way in. Kane's eyes sharpened. Can we get close enough to board it? He asked. Connor hesitated, but then nodded. It's risky, but we can try. If we use the asteroid belt as cover, we should be able to approach undetected. Kane made a decision. Set a course for that ship, he ordered. We'll take it out from the inside. If we can get close enough, we can't wait for the Agarak to come to us. We have to take the fight to them. The crew moved with practiced precision as they prepared for the daring operation. The fleet destroyer slowly edged toward the heart of the Agarak fleet, using the asteroid field as their cover. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. The fate of Earth and humanity's future depended on it. Kane stood at the command chair watching the crew working together. As they always had, he could feel the weight of the responsibility. But there was no turning back now. They had proven they could survive against impossible odds. But to win, they would have to push even further. They were going to board that ship and fight their way to the heart of the Agarak fleet. And when they did, they would learn the secrets they needed to save Earth and the rest of humanity from destruction. The fleet destroyer slowly maneuvered toward the smaller Agarak ship, hidden within the massive fleet ahead of them. It was a risky move. Using the asteroid belt as cover was their best chance to stay undetected, but it wouldn't guarantee success. The Agarak were masters of detection, and if they were spotted, it could mean the end for everyone on board the ship. Kane stood on the bridge, his mind focused on the mission ahead. He could feel the tension in the air, but he refused to let it show. The crew had already done the impossible once, and now it was time to do it again. This time, they weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting for humanity's future. Admiral, we're closing in on the target, Connor reported, her voice steady despite the tension. Keep us steady, Kane ordered, his eyes glued to the starboard screen, watching for any signs of enemy movement. As they neared the smaller Agarak ship, the entire bridge seemed to hold its breath. The asteroid field was dense, but they could still see faint signals on their sensors that indicated the presence of enemy vessels. The Agarak were never alone. They traveled in packs, waiting for their prey to get too close. Kane's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his face calm as ever. The plan was simple. They had to board the Agarak ship and take control of its systems from the inside. If they could disable its cloaking technology, it would give them the chance to strike at the heart of the enemy fleet and disrupt their ability to attack Earth. Prepare for boarding, Kane said, his voice firm. We move fast, and we move together. The crew scrambled into action, readying the necessary equipment for the mission. Kane turned to Connor, his mind racing with last-minute calculations. You'll lead the team to secure the ship once we're inside, he said, his voice low but commanding. Connor nodded without hesitation. She had proven herself time and again, and Kane trusted her with this mission as much as he trusted any member of his crew. We're ready, sir, Connor replied, her voice steady. The fleet destroyer came to a halt just outside the range of the enemy ship. The team moved into position, ready for the final push. Kane glanced at the bridge crew one last time. They had been through so much already, But now they faced the final test. "Go," Kane ordered. The air on the bridge seemed to crackle with energy as the boarding pods were launched with precision. They zipped through the empty space toward the Agarak ship, the adrenaline racing through the crew's veins. Kane watched as the pods closed in on their target. Every second felt like an eternity, but at last the pods made contact, and the breach was successful. "Team is on board," Connor's voice came through the comms, her tone tight with focus. "We're inside." Kane's heart raced as he listened to the comms feed. He could hear the sounds of combat echoing through the channels as the team fought their way through the corridors of the enemy ship. They had to secure the central control room and disable the cloaking technology once and for all. Minutes passed like hours before Connor's voice came back through the comms. "Admiral, we've disabled their cloaking systems," she said, her voice triumphant. "The fleet is now visible. We can hit them with everything we've got." Kane's pulse surged with relief and renewed determination. "Good work," he said. "Now get to the engine room and make sure their power is cut off. Once we do that, we can take down the rest of their fleet." The battle was far from over, but now they had the advantage. The fleet destroyer's weapons powered up as the remaining Agarak ships became visible on the sensors. Kane gave the order. "Fire everything we've got," he commanded. The ship's weapons roared to life as the first shots hit the exposed Agarak fleet. It was like a symphony of destruction, each blast landing with pinpoint accuracy as their power systems began to crumble. The Agarak ships fought back, but they were disoriented without their cloaking technology, and their defensive systems were in chaos. The human fleet was unstoppable now, and Kane knew that this was the moment they would make their stand. He stood tall on the bridge watching as the enemy fleet began to fall apart. They had taken on the most powerful force in the galaxy and won, and now humanity's future was secure. "We did it," Connor said, her voice full of pride. "The Agarak are retreating." Kane allowed himself a small smile, but he didn't let his guard down. The war was over for now, but it wasn't the end of humanity's journey. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. "Let's get back to Earth," Kane said, as he turned toward the command console. "We've earned it, but we still have a long road ahead."